Elden Ring's expansion just dropped, and I didn't play it. I thought the base game was decent enough, but it clearly had major issues in regards to difficulty balance, so I knew the expansion wasn't going to be for me. FromSoft's mantra when it comes to developing their modern games is make it harder, make it harder. Make the bosses spin like a gravitron and wait them out until you can poke them once. I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but when you compare the hardest boss in Elden Ring to the hardest boss in Demon's Souls, you can see this enormous gap in terms of what the developers expect from the players. And remember, at the time, Demon's Souls was considered brutal. I don't think it's a reach to say that a large part of the appeal of these modern FromSoft titles is that people enjoy beating games that are widely considered difficult, probably as an ego boost. Like if you can beat Elden Ring without summons, that ostensibly means you're a good gamer, and in reality it just means that you beat Elden Ring without summons, nothing more. You're not suddenly good enough to beat Ninja Gaiden 2 on Master Ninja, or one credit clear a cave shmup. But some players are always looking out for the hardest challenge. They need to beat games blindfolded, with DDR dance pads, and FromSoft takes this to mean that they need to one-up themselves with each new game they produce. In terms of boss difficulty, Dark Souls was a step up from Demon's Souls, Bloodborne raised its ceiling even higher, and just when everyone thought that Sekiro was too hard, Elden Ring came along and made things even harder. Now with Shadow of the Erdtree, the difficulty has been raised again, and we're at the point where we've long since overshot what's considered reasonable. But if anyone dares to speak up, they're immediately confronted with the same tired memes. Get good, skill issue, filtered, mad 'cause bad. These phrases are used to stymie any discussion about the difficulty of these games, and it's so widespread that I can't even tell if it's genuine or not anymore. If you dare to bring up a boss being unreasonably difficult, players will reach into their bag of mimetic phrases and pull out the first one they grab. The game isn't hard, you just suck. And we're trapped in this obnoxious stage of meme warfare, ironic posting. By bringing attention to this issue, you incite people to fulfill this prophecy. And if you say you're not filtered, you will immediately provoke a response from someone saying you were filtered, not because they actually believe you struggled, but because they crave attention. They know people will swarm to upvote their post, which in turn activates the dopamine receptors in their brain, because seeing a number go up is satisfying. The reality of the situation goes a bit deeper beyond bosses being more difficult. FromSoft forgot how to make bosses fun. The design philosophy for Demon's Souls was to make each boss a unique encounter. One is blind, one is a puzzle, one uses illusions and traps to disorient you, one is an invasion from another player, one just sits there and waits to die after you kill her guardian. None of these bosses are challenging by modern FromSoft standards, but they're enjoyable encounters because they test you in interesting ways. You're not memorizing patterns and exploiting openings for every single boss, just a handful. But FromSoft quickly realized that to placate their rabid fanbase that just wants everything harder, they need to one-up themselves with each new game. And it's a lot easier to create challenge by pitting you against multiple bosses at once, giving bosses lengthy attack strings, holding animations to bait you into rolling, and upping the damage output to extreme levels. And now we've reached a point where players are finally sick of dying in 2 hits. Sick of waiting for hyper anime sword swings to finally calm down so you can squeeze in a hit, or maybe 2. With Shadow of the Erdtree getting mixed reviews on Steam, we're finally seeing some pushback from the community, but the community brought this on themselves. For years, when you tried to voice your complaints, players would hand-wave your arguments away with "get good." The meaning of these memes is essentially, you're only mad because you haven't learned the boss's patterns. Except instead of typing all of that out, they write with shorthand expressions. But it misunderstands the point of the argument. I'm not mad because the boss is hard. I'm mad because the boss isn't fun. We've entered an era of complacency in terms of boss design at FromSoft, where flooding the entire screen with a damaging hitbox is considered acceptable because it's difficult. And if it's difficult, that means it's good. Difficulty is an important factor to consider when it comes to enjoying video games. Achieving victory is made sweeter when there's a struggle. When you overcome a larger hurdle, you feel a greater sense of satisfaction. But this doesn't apply to modern FromSoft games, because once you beat a boss, instead of satisfaction, you feel dread because you know there's a boss coming up that's going to be even harder, because the devs have long since dispensed with the mentality that a boss fight should be interesting. It should instead trap you in a multi-hit combo and kill you for making a single mistake. It's one thing to keep these types of challenges as optional encounters. As difficult as Malenia is, you don't need to fight her to complete the game. But with the Elden Ring DLC, the goal was to make bosses harder than anything you'd find in the base game, so what should have been an optional challenge in the grand scheme of things was instead the springboard for the next game. And how high does this ceiling stretch? At what point will FromSoft realize that they've fallen for Bandai Namco's marketing shtick for the first Dark Souls? Prepare to die. Wasn't the original goal for these games to make them rewarding, not difficult? The difficulty was used to tune the experience to a level that creates that satisfaction. This mentality is completely absent at this point, because the point isn't to create a rewarding experience, as that requires nuance. Now the goal is to just outright make this as hard as possible. They're too fearful of creating an easier game because the masses want to beat these games as a form of gamer credibility. If you take that away from them, what's the appeal? Just a well-designed game? That's no fun. Then we can't repeat get good at everyone that struggles against the boss. I don't think including difficulty sliders or an easy mode is a solution, because players will be vilified for resorting to these options in the same way you're told that you didn't beat the game if you use summons. On one hand, who cares what others think, just play the game in whichever way you find most entertaining. On the other, I do think there's a hint of validity to getting the most out of these games by ignoring summons, but only if the bosses feel balanced around one-on-one engagements. At no point has this series ever had engaging fights against enormous bosses, primarily because FromSoft refuses to change the way their camera operates because they've realized that cumbersome camera controls are a feature. It adds to the difficulty, so why change it if their goal is to make each game harder? And when enemies zip around the room, attack from a range, and combo you to death from full health, you're left wondering if this is the only way FromSoft knows how to design bosses these days. So many fights have devolved into finding one or two attacks you can safely punish, waiting for those attacks to appear and squeezing in your counter. We've deviated so far from Armor Spider in Demon Souls, where the challenge came not from finding an attack animation to punish, but from finding a safe window to approach the boss and realizing when you need to retreat. So now we're stuck at an impasse. This DLC is clearly too difficult, but if FromSoft nerfs it, anyone that beats the game post-nerf didn't truly beat the game. And if they don't nerf it, it will remain absurdly difficult. The damage has already been done. Nobody stands to benefit from this experience. Shadow of the Erdtree would be more appealing if it didn't pack the world with grueling bosses, but by including more bosses like Godric. Bosses that offer just the right level of challenge, where the movesets have reasonable tells, and where you're expected to die 2 or 3 times before succeeding, instead of being trapped for hours on end. I can understand if New Game Plus brings the pain, but why should the baseline experience here be comparable to the New Game Plus challenges found in the older games? This is no longer an issue of banging your head against the wall until you succeed. Anyone that wants to beat these games can beat these games. If you fight Malenia for 10 straight hours, you'll eventually beat her, regardless of your skill level. The question isn't, can I beat this? It's, is this struggle worth it? Sure, beating Malenia brings relief and satisfaction, but so does taking a shit, except I don't need to strain for 10 hours to get that satisfaction. FromSoft's games used to bring a satisfying level of challenge without resorting to creating these bosses that demand hours of patience to get through. Is this what we're relegated to at this point? Each major boss needs to be a 5-hour slugfest, and if you don't want that, you can turn it into an MMO raid where 4 people gang up on them? There used to be balance here, and when people voice their criticisms, they're dismissed with memes as if their criticisms have no merit. FromSoft is treated as this infallible industry darling, and the issue is never that their games are too hard. The issue is that you suck. When these issues are pushed aside and people praise each game for pushing the difficulty slider higher and higher, FromSoft has every reason to believe that all people expect out of them are games with extreme difficulty. So where are we gonna be in 10 years? Are we gonna have tutorial bosses that one-shot you? Where can the line be drawn? I'm not even sure if people understand what they're saying anymore. They've been conditioned to respond to the tone of someone's voice with skill issue, even if the subject matter has nothing to do with a player's level of skill at a game. Regurgitating the same tired line in every single discussion is no longer amusing. It's childish. And if your goal is to drive people away from talking about anything, and instead cultivate a society where people do nothing but speak in abbreviations and memes, killing all the joy of conversation, then congratulations, your plan is working.